Well, welcome to the Australian Institute of International Affairs. I'm ACT President Cam Hawke, and I'm joined this evening by Associate Professor James Curran from the US Studies Centre to talk about his new book, Unholy Fury, Whitlam and Nixon at War, or is it Nixon and Whitlam at War? James, firstly, thank you for the book. It's a great read. I was wondering if you just talk to us a little bit to begin with about what drew you to the topic and how the project matured.
Sure. Well, thanks very much for having me. And look, I first came across this material, particularly about the kind of Whitlam-Nixon clash, when I was working on another book, which was a book called The Unknown Nation, Australia After Empire. And what we were interested in there, my co-author and I, Stuart Ward, was looking at the foreign policy dimension of the Whitlam government and how, and indeed John Gorton beforehand as well, and William McMahon, in how they were trying to update this relationship with Britain and indeed America, and in particular how Whitlam was trying to classify the United States as a foreign country for Australia. And so it became very apparent to me that as well as Whitlam trying to sort of move the American alliance onto a more equal plane with Australia's other foreign policy relationships, that there was a great deal of trauma and torment in doing this. And that this particularly rubbed the Nixon administration up the wrong way. And so I thought there must be something here, because I didn't feel that there'd been a particular crisis this bad in the relationship up until that point. So I thought this is worth exploring.
Yeah. Nixon and Whitlam are both pretty, compelling characters. They're, men of intellect, shrewd political operators, and, let's be honest, great egos.
Yeah.
Did you find, as you studied them, that you liked them any more or less, or you respected them more or less as statesmen? Were there revelations there?
Yeah, I mean, I guess what I was struck by, when you get beyond this kind of bitter antagonism that developed between the two in that period, really when you look at their respective careers, I mean, they did have quite a lot in common. I mean, they had both spent quite a bit of time in the political wilderness. They were both very determined to reshape the foreign policies of their distinctive countries. Both very keen on ideas, both had a sense of history, and both of them, of course, at roughly the same time, as we know, were hurtling along the diplomatic trail to China. I mean, what struck me most about Nixon, I guess, was in many ways I think he provides something of a break in American foreign policy traditions. I mean, here is a president saying in the late 60s and early 70s that it's actually a good thing that America is not the predominant power in the world.
Yeah.
Right? He's talking about a multipolar world. He's talking about the fact that there's going to be a balance of power here, and that it's a good thing that this might be balanced with China and Soviet Union, the European Union, Japan and Germany, that this is a good thing for world affairs. So Nixon is talking a different language, I think. He's not initially talking this language of American exceptionalism. So it was what they had in common that struck me quite significantly in the early part of this research. And then that provided a good foundation then to sort of look at how it all broke down.
Yeah, well, I guess that poses, the obvious question is what went wrong, because I picked up on this on my reading of the book too. They do seem to have a lot in common. They're both moving towards China.
That's right.
Example, recognising China in a period where that's controversial, to say the least.
Yeah.
So let's talk about that a little bit more.
Yeah, well, I mean, certainly Whitlam is very keen to, during his march to the Lodge, particularly as that gains momentum in the late 60s and early 70s, he's keen to give Nixon as much credit as possible for the opening to China. At one point he even sort of boasts to diplomatic officials in Tokyo, this is after Whitlam has been there as opposition leader, that he's happy to be a pathfinder for Nixon.
Yes.
Now, I can't imagine that going down too well in Washington. But nevertheless, Whitlam is basically saying Nixon can go a lot further in this than a Democrat can, because a Democrat would be accused of kowtowing to communism, and the opening to China and détente, as Whitlam sees it, these are the conditions that allow the Labor Party to come to office. Because as Whitlam is saying, we're released from this ideological straitjacket of the Cold War, and Nixon is the one who's brought that in. So again, this is another point in common. But yes, I mean, Whitlam obviously had been advocating the recognition of China since he first came into Parliament in '53. It took Nixon a lot longer, but the fracturing of the Cold War consensus in the United States political debate in the mid-60s, I think showed Nixon that perhaps it wasn't a good thing to keep this Chinese dragon isolated for too much longer.
Yeah.
So they come together on that point. But for Whitlam, it's a great opening and a new beginning for Australian foreign policy. For Nixon, it's a great transformation, but he can't still criticise, obviously, the Vietnam War. I mean, he's obviously going into China to try and alleviate some of the problems for America in terms of withdrawing from Vietnam, but he can't criticise the Vietnam War in the same way that Whitlam can.
Yeah. You give a really good account of the backstory to Whitlam and Nixon as well, so from 1951 through the 50s and the 60s. And one thing that comes through, the Americans have a lot of concern about the Labor Party.
That's right.
The idea of the Labor Party, coming to power, what that will mean for the alliance. In this day and age, that seems, almost absurd for our era. The alliance is, truly bipartisan now. I mean, have we turned a page there in history where we'd never go back to that sort of thing? Do you think the idea of partisanship in the alliance is behind us? And is there a flip side to that? Can that be a bad thing? Should we debate it more?
Well, that's an excellent question, Cameron. An excellent question. Yes, we are in a remarkable period of bipartisanship. It seems almost an eternity ago that Simon Crean could get up in the Parliament and make the case, much like Corwell did in May of '65, that you can support the alliance, but you can oppose a war in which America is asking Australia to get involved, as Crean did in Iraq and as Corwell did in Vietnam. I think this is a remarkable period that is unlike anything we've ever seen. I think arguably China's rise makes Australia more important to the Americans than we have been before, and there's plenty of evidence to support that with the Darwin marine rotation and other forms of cooperation with the Americans. But I do think, yes, the flip side is that we're becoming a little bit too lackadaisical and forgetful about periods in the past where we did have serious divergence of interest with the Americans in our own region. And that's not to say that we should be captive to this history. That's not to say we should be gloomy about when we feel the Americans let us down. It's not to say we should be nationalists and try to kick them in the shins or poke the president in the eye just to make a point. But I think we need to be sensitive to these moments where the US has quite understandably acted in its own interests on things that are important to us.
Absolutely.
We forget those things at our peril.
Yeah, I agree. Look, we could keep talking, but that's probably as good a point as any to wrap up. The book's out now. I commend it to everybody. For more information, you can visit our website, www.internationalaffairs.org.au. Thanks, James.
Thank you.